Okay, hi. We now have viewers. Great. Good day. It's kind of morning for me because I made some mistakes in which medications I remembered to take, and did not really sleep appropriately. But now I'm here, and I'm cognitively functional, and that's the important part. So hold on. I want to switch out my books because I haven't done that. A fun story about the books that I put on my wall behind me is that, first of all, they're almost always, hey Rachel, um, like they're important to me in some way. Uh, and two, they usually have some sort of relevance to whatever theme I'm setting up on my wall. So there's always conspiracy theories you can make from whatever my art wall is doing. So recently, I was given All About Love by a coworker. We did a book exchange. I'm a huge fan of bell hooks, as anybody who knows anything about me would probably quickly guess. I haven't really read All About Love much. I've skimmed it a little bit, but I haven't like deeply read it yet. And I'm hoping I have a highlighter like sitting here with me. I don't. That's so unfortunate. Um, but I have read other of Hooks's work, and an important thing to remember about Bell Hooks, by the way, if you're ever talking about her, the lowercase is intentional and important. So never uppercase Bell Hooks. I know that feels very counterintuitive, and maybe even a little rude for some folks. Um, but that's like an important part of her name and her identity, is that it wasn't uppercased. Um, I'm doing okay, Rachel. How are you doing? As I said, it's been a hard week on the internet, and I know that GDA happened yesterday, and sometimes those things can like temporarily smooth over some of the wounds of whatever has happened during the week. So anybody who's sort of out of the debate loop, um, there's been a few different things, right? Obviously, a number of very difficult things in like the United States happened, but then there was also this like big, like right afterwards, there is this sort of debate that came up around the Stray Kids movie being aired in Israeli theaters. And there is, of course, a large global entertainment boycott on Israel. And so there's sort of these petitions and such going around. I need to double check and make sure they're petitioning like the right places. Whether the decision was made before the movie's rights were sold to, I think, was it Universal? I don't remember. It's a little unclear like whose decision the theaters are in, whether like JYPE was involved at all, whether it was Live Nation's choice, whether it was like Universal's choice. Like there's or UMG's maybe. Is that the same place? I don't remember. But there's obviously a sort of same thing with that happened with Lose My Breath, and I think the internet got very difficult. Obviously it stirred the same debate it always stirs about whether politics belongs in K-pop. And of course, that's such a silly question. Like, first of all, as I said on Threads, I have finally lost me followers because I think I posted in too many caps locks. Um, JYP himself is a politician. Um, obviously everything is politics, but like K-pop is very politics. K-pop is, one of the, like, K-pop and K-dramas are sort of the main tenet of of Southern Korea's like soft power um method. I don't know much about T-pop. I've liked the T-pop that I have heard. I want to explore T-pop a little bit, but I don't. I of like J-pop, K-pop, T-pop, C-pop. I know the most about K-pop and J-pop. I don't have a lot of context on like T-pop and C-pop. Um, do I know LYKN? Probably not. Let me do a Google search and see. I very rarely know names of anything. Um, no, I don't know them. Um, it's been so long. I mean, when the last time I was involved in T-pop at all was like 15 years ago. I was listening to Golf and Mike. Damn. Um, uh, but yeah, anyway, I think that it also caused, a lot of people end up feeling very like helpless and uncertain when the question of politics in like entertainment comes up. Um, and I think that that's where a lot of the debate comes from, is that people don't want there to be politics in celebrity culture, in idol culture. They want it to be a dissociation hobby, um, because they don't feel like they have any power or influence or capacity to engage with it as a political concept. Probably also not the knowledge to really, but like that's something you can sort of acquire. Um, there's also always people who say that like politics is irrelevant and things like that. But I am someone who strongly believes that reading is praxis. Um, and reading is really, really, really important. I think, especially in social media, we have lost a lot of the importance of reading like real concepts and like engaging deeply with concepts. Social media teaches us that we need to have an opinion on everything, and we need to have that opinion right now. Um, and so we don't tend to be as likely to actually deeply learn about the concepts we're talking about. Um, again, it's instead of the question of is K-pop about politics, it's more helpful to ask, in what way could it be about politics? And then we engage at that level of the possibility. Um, and we sort of work with what the question. So reading is really important praxis because it gives us our foundation. It gives us both like theoretical foundation in what praxis can look like and what it is, but it also gives us just like perspective foundation. Like in that we read other people's perspectives, and we read them at a length where they actually have the space to express them. And we then ask ourselves how we want to engage in those thoughts. So that was my thought of what I want to do here. I started reading all about love, and it reminded me so much of my experience with Stay and Stray Kids anyway. And then this sort of came up, and it just felt like a really nice way to create a gentle opportunity to engage at that reading as praxis level at a very direct and like accessible way. So I'm going to do that. I don't expect many people to join this live, but I'm going to. I keep forgetting to press the start recording button on these. It's kind of a problem since I started streaming. I need to start doing that first. But anyway, I'm going to just like put this out, maybe even just download the VOD straight and put this out on YouTube as well. And depending on how people feel about it, might do it some more or might not. We shall see. Okay, so I'll just start, and as I think of things, I'll pause, and if you think of things, you can send them in if you are watching live, one of the 4 people who pop in. The first love letter I ever wrote was sent to you, just as this book was written to talk to you. Anthony, you have always been my most intimate listener. I will love you always. In the Song of Solomon, there is this passage that reads, I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let go. To holding on, to knowing again that moment of rapture, of recognition where we can face one another as we really are, stripped of artifice and pretense, naked and not ashamed. That's the dedication. Truly beautiful dedication, right? A little love letter in and of itself. I really like that idea of just as this book was written to talk to you. I think so often we write to, we always write for some type of audience. And I think it's a good question of who we are writing for anytime we write anything. When we write a social media post, when we write a Discord message, when we write a journal, when we write a book, when we write a fan fiction, who are we writing to talk to? And I think it's a good question as well of like, what is the version of an idol we're conceptualizing if ever we're writing to talk to them? Because I think about things like Bubble or like fans, and I truly wonder if people are writing as though they're writing to talk to their idols, or if they're writing to talk to themselves, or if they're writing to talk to a version of maybe a combination of the two. It's not a question I've asked myself either. I don't really have Bubble anymore, but I do have fans. And that's maybe a useful question for me to even ask myself is who do I think I am actually writing to talk to on the rare occasion that I am writing something ostensibly directly meant for an idol. And that's praxis too, right? Thinking about, especially for like international stays of different ethnicities, things like that. When we talk to other people, we have political programming within us on how we talk to them. Good morning, Kat. And so we can think about like, it's not just what are the biases we go into talking to an audience with, and do we truly lead with love, or do we lead with something we haven't identified. But like, what is all of that messaging that comes in together when we speak to a stranger of like very different positionalities that we are? It starts with a preface. Preface. When I was a child, it was clear to me that life was not worth living if we did not know love. I wish I could testify that I came to this awareness because of the love I felt in my life. But it was love's absence that let me know how much love mattered. I was my father's first daughter. At the moment of my birth, I was looked upon with loving kindness, cherished. Oh, there's an ad. I'll let the ad finish. And then maybe I'll restart this. I already have some thoughts. But there's an ad first, so I'm going to drink some tea because that's useful. Maybe after doing... Can I type the books in the comments? Yes, of course. So this one is all about love. Love by Bell Hooks. I assume the other book that you're talking about is the one that I was reading yesterday. So that's... I have another keyboard. I really need to finish setting up my goddamn desk. It's been like literal years. On Becoming a Person by Carl Rogers. On Becoming a Person really surprised me because it was written in like 1961, I think, and I have like so little faith in psychotherapy books written in the 60s. But this is really like one of the foundations of our ideas about like person and environment, meeting a person when they're where they're at. Like a lot of modern humanistic therapies, this is really a foundation for, and it's a really, really, really beautiful book. So I was very pleasantly surprised by it when I found it. Ad break ended. My community is back. I'm going to restart this because I think that the ad had started. But I mean, I also want to restart this with like Hyunjin in mind. I have a feeling that this is going to overall make me think a lot about Hyunjin, who talks so much about love. But I mean, they all talk a lot about love. But this one, I think, really, like, it hits me personally, but it also hits me as far as like what he's talked about with his experiences with love. When I was a child, it was clear to me that life was not worth living if we did not know love. I wish I could testify that I came to this awareness because of the love I felt in my life. But it was love's absence that let me know how much love mattered. I was my father's first daughter. At the moment of my birth, I was looked upon with loving kindness, cherished and made to feel wanted on this earth and in my home. To this day, I cannot remember when that feeling of being loved left me. I just know that one day I was no longer precious. Those who had initially loved me well turned away. The absence of their recognition and regard pierced my heart and left me with a feeling of brokenheartedness so profound I was spellbound. Grief and sadness overwhelmed me. I did not know what I had done wrong, and nothing I tried made it right. No other connection healed the hurt of that first abandonment, that first banishment from love's paradise. For years I lived my life suspended, trapped by the past, unable to move into the future. Like every wounded child, I just wanted to turn back time and be in that paradise again, in that moment of remembered rapture where I felt loved, where I felt a sense of belonging. We can never go back. I know that now. We can go forward. We can find the love our hearts long for, but not until we let go of the grief about the love we lost long ago, when we were little and had no voice to speak the heart's longing. All the years of my life I thought I was searching for love I found, retrospectively, to be years where I was simply trying to recover what had been lost, to return to the first home, to get back the rapture of first love. I was not really ready to love or be loved in the present. I was still mourning, clinging to the broken heart of girlhood, to broken connections. When that mourning ceased, I was able to love again. I awakened from my trance state and was stunned to find the world I was living in, the world of the present, was no longer a world open to love. And I noticed that all around me I heard testimony that lovelessness had become the order of the day. I feel our nations turning away from love as intensely as I felt love's abandonment in my girlhood. Turning away, we risk moving into a wilderness of spirit so intense we may never find our home again. I write of love to bear witness both to the danger in this movement and to call for a return to love. Redeemed and restored, love returns us to the promise of everlasting life. When we love, we can let our hearts speak. So that's the preface. Let's think about this first from a praxis perspective, and then from an application perspective. Obviously, bell hooks practices, a praxis around anything with hooks is writing is a praxis based in love. It's a praxis based in sentimentality, in hope, fundamentally, right? Love is, in many ways, hope directed. It's a hope that is given shape. So here we first discuss how we learn to love, right? And sometimes we learn to love because we are raised with love and taught that love. And sometimes we learn to love because we spend many years learning later. I think what Hooks is talking about here happens to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. That first abandonment, and then trying always to restore a concept of love rather than building something new, rather than understanding what love is in the present with who we are. We try to fix a past love that is broken. And in focusing on the past in that way, we create an inability to love authentically in reality as it is in the present. So if we identify that love is praxis, rather loving as a verb, to love, to express love, to give love, to build love, to transform around love. If that's our fundamental theory of praxis that we're working with at the moment, then of course the first step of that praxis must be to learn how to love truly and authentically in the moment in reality as we are. How do we think about that with fandom? I think it's very applicable many times in many ways. I think that, unfortunately, many people try to find that concept of love that they are still grieving in idols and celebrities, rather than first mourning that love and having a love that is true to the relationship they really have with that idol. I see this a lot when people talk about like truly falling in romantic love with an idol. That doesn't seem like it's likely an honest love based on reality as it is in the moment, which I know seems very harsh for people who do feel that way. But it's my honest method of providing love in this moment, because we have to do that piece first before we can truly love. And I think so much of that mourning and that grief is about learning to give ourselves the love that had abandoned us, right? Building an authentically loving relationship with ourselves and who we have become, and finding that love in ourselves first. Which is not at all to say that like you must fully love yourself in order to love others. But I think similar to what Hyunjin, again, I was thinking about Hyunjin a lot in this one. What he was saying about like truly loving, like deeply loving, requiring an amount of self-love. I think that is true, because I think we have to start to heal how we love ourselves before we understand what love can really be in reality as it is right now. We have to pull ourselves out of that past. We have to love ourselves enough to not be trying to find a love from the past in a different present person, right? We have to find the love from the past in the parts of us built from the past so that we can love the person in the present, right? So we have to find enough of that self-love, and we have to be honest and realistic about what we might be trying to rebuild and whether we have truly mourned and grieved in an integrated, healthy way love we lost in the past and might be trying to recreate. So I think that that's like our idea of what that first step of praxis is. And that stabilizes us in fandom. It makes our relationships far less parasocial, or rather, it makes our parasocial relationships far less overwhelming in a way that we can't realistically handle, both with the idol and with the fandom. It makes us be more realistic about letting go of other people if we need to let go of them, but it also makes us more realistic about holding on to community if we need to hold on to community. You know, as I said on Threads, abandon community, community abandons you. So we have to be able to love authentically, truly, realistically enough to build, manage, sustain, be part of community so that we can be held accountable and we can hold others accountable and we can build, right? We can't do praxis in isolation. And so we have to be able to love in different appropriate ways our fandom and idols in a way that we are doing praxis together. So that's what I think about when I think about that preface. It's a beautiful preface, obviously. Hooks really straddles the line between... Hooks really writes more like lyrical essays than really anything else. I think that's how I'd qualify her work. And it's truly very beautiful. Let's see if I think of a different member as we go into the next section. The next section is introduction, and the way this book is organized is there's basically like an anchor word for each chapter. So this one is grace, touched by love. And each section starts with a quote from someone else. So the quote is, "It is possible to speak with our heart directly. Most ancient cultures know this. We can actually converse with our heart as if it were a good friend. In modern life, we have become so busy with our daily affairs and thoughts that we have lost this essential art of taking time to converse with our heart." And that's by Jack Kornfield. You know, I think I've talked about this a little bit when I've talked about the importance of daydreaming. And it is important to build that time for introspection, for self, for calm, for working with our soul, you know. I think that music is such a big part of that for a lot of us too. When I think about why so many of us love Stray Kids, I think that, you know, I think a lot about Pangchan's Two Kids Room with Changmin. I think about this a lot when I listen to their music now. Chris saying that he will listen to the song before he listens to the lyrics to just see if the emotion is resonates. And I think that that's part of the allure of the group so much, is that the emotions are so resonant regardless of being given context. And I think a lot of us utilize music to converse with our hearts. Or at least a lot of us are inclined to. Whether people are actually doing that is sort of a different matter. But I think that the intrigue is there for so many people. And that's why they're so exploratory of so many genres. Ooh, can you talk more about what you mean by silent cry as far as this context? I do think, you know, a lot of Han pop is very interesting in that way too, overall. Exploring the emotional resonance of the song versus the lyrics. Yeah, that upbeat melody and the really sad lyrics. I think that there's a lot of that. Get Lit is very similar in some ways. People really listen to it as a party song, and it I'm not going to get into my analysis of Get Lit, but it's very, very, very stressful. Get Lit stresses me the fuck out. It is interesting, a lot of these songs, the layers of emotional resonance. There's a different emotional resonance once you know the lyrics. There's a different emotional resonance once you start digging into it. But you really have to listen to the song to understand the full meaning of the emotional resonance, right? People, if you just read the lyrics before listening to the song and you try to interpret what the emotional resonance of the song is going to be, it's not going to be very effective. You're going to probably be really off in the interpretation. But also, if you only listen to the music and you never get to the lyrics, you will have some of the intended emotional resonance, but it won't be all of it. And then once you start to put things together, it creates just like this very interesting multi-layered impact. Yeah, I think I know the YouTube channel you're talking about, and I want to watch it. I really like watching. So for whoever's watching this, I'll put. Is there a way to put the chat on screen? I don't know. But Kat's bringing up a YouTuber who breaks down the puns and jokes. And I really like watching Korean reactors when they give me some more of that information. Hi, Maria. Because yeah, it just gives you more and more of that insight into all of the layers. Their music is so layered, and I think that really is so much of why a lot of people are intrigued by it. Is I don't know Connor Rankine is who is this person, and tell me of their relevance. That is a hockey player. I don't know anything about hockey, and I don't know the immediate relevance of hockey, but I trust there's something there. Hey, Nori. Yeah, so, I think when we're talking about conversing with our heart, like, I'd encourage people to ask themselves if that's something they do, right? That's part of that process of grieving, I think, also. An ad starts in 1 minute, and I don't have the ability to snooze it. So I'm not going to quite start this yet. I still don't know what the relevance of hockey is. I'd address it in the next minute and 30 seconds if I did. I suppose this is another opportunity to stretch or something. I work with a lot of people on grief. And I think grief is so, like, it's just such a common experience. And it's so ongoing, but people really think of grief very much in isolation of, like, death. But grief is, like, in reference of all loss, all abandonment. And sometimes it integrates well, and sometimes it doesn't. Or it integrates into our heart well. And sometimes it doesn't, and that's what we refer to as complex or complicated grief. And so many people have to learn we all have to learn how to grieve love at some point, right? At some point, all of us will be abandoned by love. And at some point, all of us will abandon love. It's part of being human in, like, modern age, modern era. So you'd think that we would talk about it more, of how you grow around that loss, regardless of what shape the loss takes. Whether it's the slow pull of fading love, or a quick yank of it. I think we all build our internal houses around some loss of love. There's empty rooms in all of us. rooms that will always have a little bit of space for somebody else, that were always made for somebody else. And now we have to repurpose with the knowledge that it was always initially built for some other reason. But we talk about it as though it's so unique. And I think people truly don't realize how universal the experience of abandonment and loss is. Like, that's so much of what attachment styles essentially are, is how important is it for us to avoid grief, and how do we cope with the possibility of future grief? Like, that is just one way to think about attachment styles. And I think, our attachment styles absolutely play into how we perceive idols, how we engage with idol culture, what idols mean to us. Someone who's very preoccupied, how does that change your interaction with a parasocial relationship over somebody who's, much more avoidant? I think it's a valuable question. But now we will start this actual chapter. On my kitchen wall hang 4 snapshots of graffiti art I first saw on construction walls as I walked to my teaching job at Yale University years ago. The declaration, "The search for love continues even in the face of great odds," was painted in bright colors. At the time, sorry, that already makes me so emotional. I love graffiti. I really, really love graffiti. And I love graffiti that makes you feel something. I see so much graffiti about love in Seattle. And that's such a beautiful one. The search for love continues even in the face of great odds. And the knowledge that Hooks had, that was so important to her, that she needed to frame that. No, it's also very Hyunjin coded. I feel like this book is probably very Hyunjin coded. At the time, recently separated from a partner of almost 15 years, I was often overwhelmed by grief so profound it seemed as though an immense sea of pain was washing my heart and soul away. Overcome by sensations of being pulled underwater, drowning, I was constantly searching for anchors to keep me afloat, to pull me back safely to the shore. The declaration on the construction walls, with its childlike drawing of unidentifiable animals, always lifted my spirits. Whenever I passed this site, the affirmation of love's possibility sprawling across the block gave me hope. Signed with the first name of local artist, these works spoke to my heart. Reading them, I felt certain the artist was undergoing a crisis in his life, either already confronting loss or facing the possibility of loss. In my head, I engaged in imaginary conversations about the meaning of love with him. I told him how his playful graffiti art anchored me and helped restore my faith in love. I talked about the way this declaration, with its promise of a love waiting to be found, a love I could still hope for, lifted me out of the abyss I had fallen into. My grief was a heavy, despairing sadness caused by parting from a companion of many years, but more important, it was a despair rooted in the fear that love did not exist, could not be found. And even if it were lurking somewhere, I might never know it in my lifetime. It had become hard for me to continue to believe in love's promise when everywhere I turned the enchantment of power or the terror of fear overshadowed the will to love. I want to note here this imaginary conversation, almost this imaginary friend that is talking to your heart. And I wonder how many people use idols as that imaginary friend to talk to, right? In some ways, Hooks here created an idol for herself, right? There is an artist whose work she loved. She did not know the artist, but she built a narrative of that artist in order to talk through the needs of her heart inside of herself. How often are we building a version of an idol because we need someone to talk through our heart with, and something about them reminds us of who we need to have that conversation with? There is something about that idol that we can believe that that aspect of them is the aspect we need to see us and understand us and validate us. Sorry if that was one of those things I say that like needs you to like pause and rethink multiple aspects of your life. I sometimes have a bad habit of doing that. So I just want to note that idea of that adults have imaginary friends too, right? They just tend to be more based in some person we think is real, right? It's a fantasy version of a real person more commonly than it is a fully made up person. One day on my way to work, looking forward to the day's meditation on love that the sight of the graffiti art engendered, I was stunned to find that the construction company had painted over the picture with a white paint so glaringly bright it was possible to see faint traces of the original art underneath. So I want to note that maybe you saw this story coming. I did. The loss, the grief that's going to come from that loss, right? We already anticipate that now this is a story about grief again. It's grief of a piece of art. Why would we grieve graffiti? Well, because we have put our emotions on that graffiti now. We have built meaning that is personal to us, that gives to us, that we connect with and is helping us grow. And so to lose the physical representation of that feels like we are losing the entirety of its importance. One of the first things that stuck with me that a clinical supervisor told to me, it was when I was working in community mental health care. If you know anything about community mental health care, it's a very, very stressful job with a lot of turnover. So I was working in residential, this is like clients who came to us often from, we had an inpatient mental health hospital that shut down. And so, we got a lot of clients from there. People who had severe mental health needs who we were trying to keep off the streets. And hopefully some of them would be able to eventually find Section 8 housing or things like that. But you'd anticipate that these people might live in this place for years, if not the rest of their lives. Very, very high stress, very high turnover. And so the clients were very angry and had a lot of abandonment issues. And one of my first weeks, a client said to me, like, fuck you, I know you're just here, like, temporarily. Why the fuck should I talk to you when you're not even going to stay? When, like, what fucking value do you have here? Yes, a lot of these clients would curse you out, would threaten you, would, I once had a full-sized plant thrown at me, not very effectively. Like, it was the size of the client, so it's not like they could really, like, angle the plant, but they certainly tried to throw a full-sized plant at me. We always joked that there was this ongoing joke of, like, every day we come to work and the building isn't on fire is a surprise. And then one day I came to work and the building had caught on fire because one of the clients tried to burn. It was arson. It was arson. So that was the type of workplace it was. And I was talking to my supervisor about, like, he's not wrong, right? Like, he's not incorrect. So what do I do? Like, how do I move forward? And what she said to me, incredible line, and I use it all the time. Just because a relationship ends doesn't mean it wasn't meaningful. Just because a relationship ends doesn't mean it wasn't important. Loss does not take away value. Let's say tomorrow Stray Kids came out and just said outright, like, yeah, we keep talking about Harry Potter because actually we agree with Rowling and we think it's fine that money that goes to the Harry Potter franchise gets used to, actively attempt to genocide trans people. Like, let's just say they came out and said that. They're not going to, but, like, let's say. Obviously, I'd stop being a Stray Kids fan, like, pretty instantly, and that would be a huge loss. I'd lose not just the band and the music, but my community. Some of my friends I'd keep around, but a lot of my friends I interact with in fandom on a fandom level. Now, I think part of praxis is ensuring that people who you see as friends, you build real relationships with beyond fandom, right? So that you do not, I would not immediately lose all community, right? Even if I didn't stay in K-pop, I've made enough true, real connections who, spend time around me regardless of that. A lot of people would mourn not just the loss and the abandonment and the disappointment, but would mourn the importance of everything else, right? So if that happened, would I immediately regret all of the work I put into the fandom? No. Because I've done all of this because it brings me joy. I've done all of this because I see it bring meaning and joy to other people. Why would I regret doing something that I honestly did out of pure love for myself and others? I had no way of knowing the information that would ultimately lead me to leave the fandom if that's what happened. And there's no reason for me to regret or grieve the things that brought me love and value. So even if that relationship, that set of relationships, that community, all of that ended tomorrow, all of this still had meaning and it was still important. But you have to know how to grieve loss rather than believe that the loss is everything, including the joy, in order to hold that. So here it feels so hard to lose this graffiti, but that's because we have put the importance onto the object itself. So I'm curious to see where this goes now, once I drink more tea. I was stunned to find that the construction company had painted over the picture with a white paint so glaringly bright it was possible to see faint traces of the original art underneath. Upset that what had now become a ritual of affirmation of love's grace was no longer there to welcome me, I told everyone of my disappointment. Finally, someone passed on the rumor that the graffiti art had been whitewashed because the words were a reference to individuals living with HIV, and that the artist might be gay. Perhaps. It is just as likely that the men who splashed paint on the wall were threatened by this public confessing of a longing for love, a longing so intense it could not only be spoken, but was deliberately searched for. After much searching, I located the artist and talked with him face to face about the meaning of love. We spoke about the way public art can be a vehicle for the sharing of life-affirming thoughts. And we both expressed our grief and annoyance that the construction company had so callously covered up a powerful message about love. To remind me of the construction walls, he gave me snapshots of the graffiti art. From the time we met, everywhere I have lived, I have placed these snapshots above my kitchen sink. Every day when I drink water or take a dish from the cupboard, I stand before this reminder that we yearn for love, that we seek it, even when we lack hope that it can really be found. That's a story of how to integrate grief. So let's actually talk about grief processing real quick. So a lot of people think about the stages of grief. The stages of grief can be a useful model, but it's not like the stages of grief is not based in any research, and it doesn't actually prove out in research. All of those emotions exist in the grieving process, but they tend to happen, they don't happen in stages, and certainly not in a specific order. A lot of what we talk about in grief processing, we talk about phases of grief. So there's acute grief, which is the grief that experiences like immediately after a loss. These are normal and adaptive reactions for grief. Obviously, the context of the grief, what is adaptive, is going to be different scales and different methods, and et cetera, and so forth. This is sort of similar to how we conceptualize PTSD. So we conceptualize PTSD when there is like a disorder as, I think I've said this before, but I don't remember what content I said it in, so I'll go through it again. As a problem in recovery, that after a trauma of pretty much any kind, it is a normal human experience to experience things that would qualify as PTSD symptoms. That is the standard adaptive response. And those look very similar to grief symptoms, and there's a reason for that. A lot of grief is involved in trauma processing. And what happens is that some people are able to recover from those symptoms for whatever reason, right? It's not like a moral personal failure that some people aren't. Some people do not recover from those symptoms, and over time those symptoms get worse, and the like cognitive errors that happen in those symptoms reinforce themselves, and the somatic like misadaption of fear reinforces itself, and so now we have PTSD. So grief is very similar to PTSD in that way, in that it starts with like this acute processing that's very normal, but then it's about how one recovers from it that becomes like more or less difficult. So what we sort of is like healthy grief is what we call integrated grief. This is the like enduring part of grief, right? The reality and meaning of the grief is, built into us, and we sort of grow. The concept that a lot of people use is growing around the grief. You can't really destroy grief. You just build around it. You build who you are around it. You sort of break it up into little bits and integrate it into how you understand the world around you, right? So in this way, right, what Hooks is talking about is integrating the grief of like the loss of this meaningful piece of art by finding the artist, by getting a different physical representation, right? So this is integrating the grief. If we don't integrate the grief, if we don't grow around the grief, if we don't find ways to accept the reality of the grief and build it into our understanding of who we are in the world around us, we get what's called complicated grief, which is the lasting form of acute grief, where like all of the things that are complicated impede actually like the restructuring of our understanding of reality to integrate grief. So it's just not yet completely part of us, and it holds ourselves, it's itself is unique because of that. I want to continue this shortly now that we've talked about grief, but there is an ad. And so I thought I had more to say about grief and that I could just go on about that. But I don't really. It's both like it's like fairly simple to do psychoeducation on, but like so complex to actually work with in reality. Complicated grief is really difficult. And it's a lot of similar features to PTSD. I've seen people have really good success with accelerated response therapy. It's ART resolution therapy. It's very difficult to Google because usually you just get art therapy. I've seen some really good responses with accelerated resolution therapy. I'm not an ART therapist, but my director at my company does ART, and so sometimes I'll refer clients to her for like a few sessions of ART, and I've seen really good responses for grief processing. So if you're ever looking for grief processing in like sort of shorter bursts, I recommend ART. It seems pretty solid for that. Okay, we're moving on. There are not many public discussions of love in our culture right now. At best, popular culture is the one domain in which our longing for love is talked about. Movies, music, magazines, and books are the place where we turn to hear our yearnings for love expressed. I'm immediately stopping right there, right? Because, like, is that not what we hear from just about everyone when they talk about why they got into Stray Kids? You know, I love seeing the way that Stray Kids love each other, in part because it reminds me of, like, my friendships and my loved ones, and I'm very lucky that that's why I got into it. So many people get into Stray Kids because they see a type of love that they yearn for. And this is again where we talk about like understanding your need for love as being praxis, because I think about the number of people who felt like almost betrayed to find out that like the kids argue with each other and that they've had fights and that they like have struggles with each other, and the reason why that feels so harsh to people is because they're building a mental model of what they think love like what they want love to look like, and they see that in the kids. And so when they find out that like love also involves conflict, or there are different types of love that look differently, or that maybe some of that love is more of a deep love for a coworker than it is a deep, you know, much more not like Western romantic love, but a more sentimental type of love. It hurts their understanding of why they're there. They've built this desire to see a certain type of love, and they've put that identity onto the group because that's what they need to believe in. But why do they need to believe in a love that looks like that and that isn't what's reality? That can be very, very hard for them, and like it changes the way you interact with fandom and with idols. So we really need to understand like what is it about love that we are searching for when we become connected to these groups? And is what we're finding in them realistic to like the practicalities of love? Or are we simply searching for something we're hoping for? Movies, music, magazines, and books are the place where where we turn to hear our yearnings for love expressed. Yet the talk is not the life-affirming discourse of the 60s and 70s, which urged us to believe all you need is love. Nowadays, the most popular messages are those that declare the meaninglessness of love, its irrelevance. As a reference point, this particular book was written in 2001, which, yeah, was definitely a very cynical time. But declare the meaninglessness of love, its irrelevance. A glaring example of this cultural shift was the tremendous popularity of Tina Turner's song with the title boldly declaring, "What's love got to do with it?" I was saddened and appalled when I interviewed a well-known female rapper, at least 20 years my junior, who, when asked about love, responded with biting sarcasm, "Love, what's that? I've never had any love in my life." Youth culture today is cynical about love, and that cynicism has come from their pervasive feeling that love cannot be found. I want to pause again. I think this is even more true now than it was 25 years ago, unfortunately. When I talk to youth, young people are very, very cynical about the reality of love. Sometimes they can believe that they'll love their peers, but like maybe nobody else. Very cynical about the idea that other people will love them. Very cynical that any adults will care for them in any way. Very cynical about what it means to be an adult. Very cynical about finding meaningful community. I think that the combination of TikTok and COVID and misinformation and disinformation and propaganda and all of that really has destroyed a lot of young people's faith and hope in what it looks like to have other people around. Even when we talk about loving idols, loving celebrities, we so rarely talk about loving our community. I mean, count the number of posts you see about loving an idol versus the number of posts you see about loving a real person you really know, which is not to say that idols aren't real. Obviously they are. But it's almost impossible for us to have a mental model of them that is fully accurate, that is fully real. The reason we love celebrities is because they are a fantasy. It's literally in the title. They are idols. Their job is to be idolized. Their job is to be slightly better, or to seem slightly better than a normal person who you know. And we acknowledge that and we build into it, but when we do so, the way that we do it, are we building more cynicism about the reality of love? That we can get real love from the people actually around us? Or are we doing it in a way that perpetuates that love? Are we doing it out of fascination and even obsession with the dream of love? Or are we doing it out of the joy of a love we're really experiencing with other people? Yeah, I think the question, if we If we led the way that we engage with fandom, first with love for fandom and community, and second for love for idol, how would that change the way we engage with social media? And would it? Would it change the way we engage with fandom if we first prioritized and led with loving with community and loving in community and loving our community? And loving the idol is part of loving our community rather than the other way around. Loving our community is part of loving the idol. Would that change how you interact with social media? I don't think it would change how I interact with social media. I think that is how I engage. But it's a good question. Youth culture today is cynical about love. And that cynicism has come from their pervasive feeling that love cannot be found. Expressing this concern in When All You've Ever Wanted Isn't Enough, Harold Kirshner writes, I am afraid that we may be raising a generation of young people who will grow up afraid to love, afraid to give themselves completely to another person because they will have seen how much it hurts to take the risk of loving and have it not work out. I am afraid that they will grow up looking for intimacy without risk, for pleasure without significant emotional investment. They will be so fearful of the pain of disappointment that they will forego these possibilities of love and joy. Whew. I'm thinking about my 20 to 26-year-old clients. Not that much younger than me, but younger enough than me. I've talked about this with my mother a little bit about "9/11 changed the world in such a dramatically cynical way. And obviously, like, for me, this is a little bit different because I grew up in North Jersey. I physically watched the towers burn. I have pictures of it. I think my mom has pictures of it. I might ask her to bring them up because I don't think she wants the pictures, but I do. You know, my best friend's dad worked in the towers. My mom had worked in the towers like a few years previously. So, you know, the way that North Jersey and New York were, you know, directly impacted is different from the way the rest of the world was impacted. But I do think that that's about the time when we're looking at both 24/7 news. 24/7 news has kind of destroyed the world. I stand by that statement because you need constant entertainment and you need constant content. And a lot of that, it was always going to become propaganda, right? At the time, the way the news happened with 9/11 was jarring and terrifying and terrible. There was so much misinformation going around. And this is really the start of like when we're starting to see everything air. We're starting to get constant news. We're starting to get constant information. It's starting to get hard to piece through it. Obviously, this is like when a lot of security theater starts. And there is a lot of cynicism that, you know, TSA, ICE, CBP, and how those things grew in those years. Like, the just general cynicism that comes with the propaganda of security theater is going to seep into the souls of young people growing up in that, especially who never experienced any type of a different world before that. You know, I was young enough that I don't have a lot of context, but old enough that I did know the difference between the world one day and the world the next. And then like social media starts and we start getting just like everything. And I think for a lot of millennials, this really, like younger millennials, this really pushed into a political activism sphere, right? Again, seeing that difference and seeing how much politics did mean for our daily lives and how important it was. You know, my middle school was having, like, our school paper was having faux presidential voting. Everyone was political in my middle school. We had deep political debates. And some of them were motivated by the school, and I'm very lucky for the school I went to. Very, very lucky. But so for, I think, a lot of us, that cynicism felt like it could still be turned into action, right? You think about like the Occupy Wall Street movement, and a lot of the statements at the time was that it was useless and I think it was sort of poorly organized, but it was a foundation for so many things. And, you know, when we were old enough to see and understand it and see the hope in it, I think it gave us hope. But I think that for a lot of people who were just a little bit younger than I am, you know, what they saw was the fallout of the recession, and what they saw was things it felt like it didn't do anything to them. And just this ongoing constant drip of horror that they grew up in more and more and more and more. And I think about my clients, and they are so cynical about love. They're so cynical about what it can be. They're so cynical about their own ability to love themselves. They're so cynical about loving life, about the possibility that life can be loved. And it's really, really hard to witness. You know, it's something that creates a lot of transference for me in some ways, because sometimes I just want to like shake them and be like, I swear to you, I promise, like, I have been in hell too, and there can be hope on the other side as long as you believe in it, right? But so many people, their goal is just to survive, and they just don't believe that there is anything more than survival. And that makes it even harder to survive because it's so demotivational. I'm really, really lucky that I always had that value of love, and that I always was moving towards love, because that built my life. It's really hard to see, how much even more cynical people not even 10 years younger than me are. And then talking to people who are 10 years younger than me can be really, truly devastating sometimes. There's just so little faith in themselves or anyone else or anything else. I'm always glad when I see young people in fandom who do believe in love. And I think that fandom can really give that to a lot of people too. Again, when you see people who lead with love and community. It's part of the reason why I talk about my Gothic enigma so much, right? It was not just kismet or serendipity that gave us a really beautiful relationship. We worked for it. We worked for that relationship. You know, there were parts that were lucky, obviously, but like, there were a lot of hard things early on. You know, we grew together and we built a beautiful relationship that I don't think anyone should settle for less. And I like to give that example to people. I always love when I have a 22-year-old tell me that the more I talk about, you know, my partners, the higher their standards get. Like, yes, please raise your standards for love. And raise your standards for how you love too, right? Believe in your ability to love authentically and healthily and truly if you do the work. Believe that if you do the work, you will be able to love in a beautiful way. And that when you love in a beautiful way, you will be loved in a beautiful way. You know, I am not loved by everyone. I am deeply, deeply disliked by many people. That is fine. I have found that I have found it is very difficult to be generally well liked. There are people who are generally well liked, but very few people are passionate about that loyalty to that like and that enjoyment. They have friends. Most people get along with them. But people I've found who are deeply, deeply loved in a passionate way also are deeply, deeply hated in a passionate way. There's just no way to be somebody who is universally adored. And that's just reality. So when we say instead that I'm going to very, very authentically love, when we make that decision, I am going to love truly, in reality as it is. We are more likely to find people who will return that love. We will also find people who will reject that love. And we have to be okay with that. You know? I recognize that I recognize that, like, I'm a bitch sometimes. I recognize that there are times that I lead with love for my community, and that means leading with not being very nice to some other people, right? That's what my love is, very protective. My authentic love is a very protective love. I know that. Not everybody's is. Not everybody has to be. But my authentic love is a very, very protective love. So I'm going to have as many people pissed off at me as I have people who really deeply care for me. That's okay. But I also know that that's very hard for people. It's not easy for me either, right? Like, I don't love seeing people say nasty things about me. I don't love seeing people say things that are mental models that I don't really understand or agree with about myself. But there's also nothing I can do about that. And I would prefer having that over not building protective community. Young people are cynical about love. Ultimately, cynicism is the great mask of the disappointed and betrayed heart. When I travel around the nation giving lectures about ending racism and sexism, audiences, especially young listeners, become agitated when I speak about the place of love in any movement for social justice. Indeed, all the great movements for social justice in our society have strongly emphasized a love ethic. Yet young listeners remain reluctant to embrace the idea of love as a transformative force. To them, love is for the naive, the weak, the hopelessly romantic. Their attitude is mirrored in the grown-ups they turn to for explanations. As spokesperson for a disillusioned generation, Elizabeth Wurtzel asserts in Bitch in Praise of Difficult Women, "None of us are getting better at loving. We are getting more scared of it. We are not given good skills to begin with, and the choices we make have tended only to reinforce our sense that it is hopeless and useless." Her words echo all that I hear an older generation say about love. When I talked of love with my generation, I found it made everyone nervous or scared, especially when I spoke about not feeling loved enough. On several occasions, as I talked about love with friends, I was told I should consider seeing a therapist. I understood that a few friends were simply weary of my bringing up the topic of love, and felt that if I saw a therapist, it would give them a break. But most folks were just frightened of what might be revealed in any exploration of the meaning of love in our lives. Yet whenever a single woman over 40 brings up the topic of love, again and again the assumption, rooted in sexist thinking, is that she is desperate for a man. No one thinks she is simply passionately, intellectually interested in the subject matter. No one thinks she is rigorously engaged in a philosophical undertaking wherein she is endeavoring to understand the metaphysical meaning of love in everyday life. No, she is just seen as on the road to fatal attraction. Disappointment and a pervasive feeling of brokenheartedness led me to begin thinking more deeply about the meaning of love in our culture. My longing to find love did not make me lose my sense of reason or perspective. It gave me the incentive to think more, to talk about love, and to study popular and more serious writing on the subject. As I pored over nonfiction books on the subject of love, I was surprised to find that the vast majority of the revered books, ones used as reference works and even those popular as self-help books, have been written by men. All my life, I have thought of love as primarily a topic women contemplate with greater intensity and vigor than anyone else on the planet. I still hold this belief, even though visionary female thinking on the subject has yet to be taken as seriously as the thoughts and writings of men. Men theorize about love, but women are more often love's practitioners. Most men feel that they receive love and therefore knows what it feels like to be loved. Women often feel we are in a constant state of yearning, wanting love, but not receiving it. In philosopher Jacob Needleman's primer, A Little Book About Love, virtually all the major narratives of love he comments on are written by men. His list of significant references doesn't include books written by women. Throughout my graduate school training for a doctorate in literature, I can recall only one woman poet being extolled as a high priestess of love, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She was, however, considered a minor poet. Yet even the most non-literary student among us knew the opening line of her most well-known sonnet, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways." This was in pre-feminist days. In the wake of the contemporary feminist movement, the Greek poet Sappho has now become enshrined as another love goddess. Back then, in every creative writing course, the poets dedicated to the love poem were always male. okay, I'm going to say some things that are, they're going to shift my view on reality. So apologies. Think about the number of female fans in K-pop spaces who revere the way men in boy groups talk about love. Think about the number of quotes from 23-year-old men about love and longing that get passed around female spaces and revered as deep, meaningful, influential thoughts about love. I see this happen a lot with Chan, Hyunjin, Felix, sometimes even Lee No. People will take quotes of them talking about love and pass them around as deeply, deeply inspirational, and I will read them and I will go, that is not new. I'm glad you found it, but like, sometimes it's not even good advice. Sometimes it is straight up bad advice. I have seen so many times straight up bad advice about love by men be passed around, predominantly female, femme, non-binary spaces. Why do we, as largely a community of marginalized genders, revere the type of love that groups of men display and practice? Why do we so rarely pass around quotes from the people we engage with fandom about love? I see stays say things about love all the time, beautiful things they'll say about love and community, and I never see those quotes passed around. And yes, part of it is because of the idolatry. But why is it so often men? I know that there's a lot of straight women, obviously, in the spaces. Obviously, there's a lot of women who stan girl groups as well. I don't know as much about the culture of standing girl groups. I don't know how much the culture ends up philosophizing about the way girl groups talk about love. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not in that culture. But I am in a culture that reveres men. And I have to wonder how much the pushback when people identify traits in male idols that might indicate that they are also a marginalized gender, that might indicate some type of gender expansiveness beyond male. If some of the rage that people have whenever we say that out loud is based in the fear of having an idolized man taken away. How much of this like how much of that anti-transness, anti-gender expansiveness that comes up, the transphobic rhetoric that comes up, because even from people who are like good allies, I see transphobic rhetoric around gender expansiveness. They don't realize it, but like they don't hang out with trans women, and they don't have a lot of culture of trans women. There are a lot of trans femme K-pop fans, but I found, you know, when I've talked to trans femme K-pop fans, they tend to be more in comment sections than in community. Community is really not safe. K-pop community is really not safe for trans femme people. Like, it's dangerous enough for trans masc people or trans non-binary people. But trans femme people, fandom is so unsafe for. And so they, tend to engage with it on a much smaller community basis. And that makes total sense to me. But that also, what that means partially, and I'm not putting this on trans women for creating their own spaces. I'm putting this on people for not creating safe enough spaces for trans women to show up, and be able to engage healthily. What it means is that a lot of cis and cishet K-pop fans have almost no experience interacting with trans women, no understanding of the trans femme experience. I am really, really lucky to have had trans femme people in my life to understand how that how that experience, and like who have been open with me about what that experience is like, and who have discussed it with me. And I'm really grateful that I've been seen as safe and accessible in that way. And it is like such a specific experience, and I see so much people talking about like idols doing things that to them seem like, oh, well, clearly this is the behavior of a cis person. And it's like, you're like, actually, that is a really, really, really common experience for trans women. And like, by talking in that way, you're being really, really invalidating of the trans femme experience. And you just don't know it because you don't know anything about trans femme women. Right? And so much of the time that rhetoric is based in like how masculine, how manly, how etc. an idol is appearing. And like reading that section, I'm really wondering how much of that could be related to or based in this fear of losing a masculine voice to engage in that like emotional resonance with, that for whatever reason people want that like imaginary friend who they're talking their hearts out to be a man. Like I really wonder if that's part of it. Yeah, because they're right. I think about like, yes, obviously our boys are artistic and create beautiful words, and I think it's totally valid to extol like poetic and beautiful things. But I never see it about like other stays. I never see like, when I see quotes of fan fiction, I never see the quotes that are beautiful writings about love, because those exist. I never see stays quoting other stays about community and about like what it means to them. I always just see them quoting their idolized men. I'm really curious about what that culture looks like in girl groups now. I'm super, if anybody knows at any point, please tell me if anybody has. I need to find somebody who's like really in girl group culture now. I'll hit up somebody, see who knows someone. I want to ask that question. I want to know how it's different. I think especially because I think there's also an element of, inadvertent like racial biasing there as well. Korean idols are seen as soft, and some of them like are softer men, but like there's this biasing around Eastern Asian men that they are simply like more feminine or softer than like other types of men. And I mean, part of that is absolutely marketing. Like part of that is absolutely intentional. We see that whenever people market celebrities primarily to women, they try to make the men have a soft masculinity. We see this a lot with like magazines, things like that. This is true of Western celebrities as well. You can tell the difference of magazines primarily marketed to women versus magazines primarily marketed to men. So some of that is in marketing, right? They want to build a certain amount of softness to appeal to large groups of women, right? They want idols to, that whole joke of like, they're a man written by a woman. They want every idol to seem like that. Some of them it's more true of than others. And they want you to 100% believe that. And for it to be that when I say, for some of it's more true than others, that like stays would go, well, it's true for all of my kids. It's true for all of Stray Kids. You're talking about other idols and other groups. And if that's the immediate reaction and you feel very strongly about that, congratulations, the marketing has worked on you. I can find red flags in every single one of the boys if I wanted to. I don't want to, and I don't say that like publicly. It's just that like everybody has them. Everybody does. Everybody has red flags. Everybody has things that would be intolerable to some people. So like if you're unable to believe that, this is not loving in reality. This is loving in the fantasy. So, there's a little bit of like purposeful marketing to give a romantic, soft masculine edge. And there is racial biasing of feminization, of softness, of all that people have to unlearn, right? Like even people who don't want to actively engage in that, like this is a bias that is difficult to shake off. It's been very, very ingrained in a lot of and a lot of people, right? So, there's an element of that there as well that's going to perpetuate this like yearning and longing for these particular men to be our guideposts on love. There's so much here. I'm thinking about the other day during one of the crafting things. I think, Kat, you were here for it. We were talking about Omegaverse and what the Gothic Enigma said about it seems like it's women who want to write about sexism but don't want to have women in the story. That sometimes seems like the case. And I feel like that is relevant here. Yeah, I'm totally shaken by this. And I'm thinking about the people I revere who have talked about love. How many of them are men versus women? Obviously, bell hooks. Derrida, Foucault, to some extent Nietzsche, Octavia Butler. Might be a little bit more even, but damn, that's the I am shaken. There's an ad going, so I'm just gonna think about that. I'm so fucking shaken by integrating this concept of men being the driving force of philosophical discussions about love and what that means for the music we consume and what that means for how we consume idol content and how we interact with our own community. That's because sexism is so prevalent in K-pop fandoms as well. But like, we don't talk about sexism because it feels like we're over it, because it's like so femme dominated, and that is not the case. That is absolutely not the case. Yeah, I need to just like, this is again what I mean by like reading as praxis, is because sometimes you read a point of view that's like, holy shit, I have a whole different perspective on reality right now. I need to fully like sit with that. And reading slow is important too, right? Like, I've been doing this, we're at 2 hours, so I've been reading this for what, about an hour and a half. And we've gotten through like 5 pages. And now, of course, I'm talking out loud, so that's slower. But like, when we're engaging in our praxis of reading, it's about allowing the words to make you curious about reality and different perspectives of reality. Because the fact of the matter is that there's not one true reality. Reality is so much how we shape it. This actually, to talk about Nietzsche talks about this quite a bit, how objectivity is a total falsehood. That reality, I think the explanation he uses is that reality is in 360 degrees around us, but we can only look in one place at one time. We can never see the entirety of reality, no matter how hard we try. So part of what our praxis of reading is trying to look in a different direction and seeing what that means, if anything, right? What we integrate, what we don't. Talking about Sappho. Back then, in every creative writing course, the poets dedicated to the love poem were always male. Indeed, the partner I left after many years first courted me with a love poem. He had always been emotionally unavailable and not at all interested in love as either a topic for discussion or a daily life practice. But he was absolutely confident that he had something meaningful to say on the subject. Whew. Yep, that sounds right. I, on the other hand, thought all my grown-up attempts to write love poems were mushy and pathetic. Words failed me when I tried to write about love. My thoughts seemed sentimental, silly, and superficial. That's a tongue twister. My thoughts seemed sentimental, silly, and superficial. When writing poetry in my girlhood, I had felt the same confidence I would come to see in my adult life only in male writers. When I first began to write poetry in girlhood, I thought love was the only topic, the most important passion. Indeed, the first poem I published at age 12 was called A Look at Love. Somewhere along the way, in that passage from girlhood to womanhood, I learned females really had nothing serious to teach the world about love. Death became my chosen topic. No one around me, professors and students alike, doubted a woman's ability to be serious when it came to thinking and writing about death. All the poems in my first book were on the topic of death and dying. Even so, the poem that opened the book, The Woman's Morning Song, was about the loss of a loved one and the refusal to let death destroy memory. Contemplating death has always been a subject that leads me back to love. Significantly, I began to think more about the meaning of love as I witnessed the deaths of many friends, comrades, and acquaintances, many of them dying young and unexpectedly. When I was approaching the age of 40 and facing the type of cancer scares that have become so commonplace in women's lives, they are practically routine, my first thought as I waited for test results was that I was not ready to die because I had not yet found the love my heart had been seeking. Shortly after this crisis ended, I had a grave illness that was life-threatening. Confronting the possibility of dying, I became obsessed with the meaning of love in my life and in contemporary culture. My work as a cultural critic offered me a constant opportunity to pay close attention to everything in the mass media, particularly movies and magazines, tell us about love. Mostly they tell us that everyone wants love, but that we remain totally confused about the practice of love in everyday life. In popular culture, love is always the stuff of fantasy. Maybe this is why men have done most of the theorizing about love. Fantasy has primarily been their domain, both in the sphere of cultural production and in everyday life. Male fantasy is seen as something that can create reality, whereas female fantasy is regarded as pure escape. Who? Let's go back and read that. Male fantasy is seen as something that can create reality, whereas female fantasy is regarded as pure escape. I wonder if that's part of why we see so many fewer masked people in fandom. What a consideration. Fandom is considered escapism. Men are considered practical beings who do things. So fandom is considered a place where things do not happen, except for escape. That feels correct, right? That's part of what we're doing here, is saying that fandom has power, so much power. Fandom has so much power, and they do ludicrous, unnecessary things with it. They spend so much power on protest trucks for somebody's goddamn haircut, and so much power on message like in entire movements around an idol getting an ambassadorship or not, or like unfair treatment because they didn't have as many lines as another idol. We spend all of our power on building the fantasy, on maintaining the fantasy, on making the escapism more. Every time the escapism is difficult for us to escape into, we try to find a way to make the escapism more escape-worthy. That's where so much of the power and effort in fandom goes. But there's so much real power. Every time we try to use real power, you get shut down because it's not part of the escapism. Right? That was the whole thing that happened on Threads, is the people who were saying, I'm here to escape reality. How dare other people, how dare other women, or people I am perceiving as women, how dare other femme people whose realm is supposed to also be fantasy try to create reality instead of escaping from it? How dare they use that type of love to create something? The men that are idolized create reality, but really they're creating our fantasy, right? Like they're building the realm for that escapism. But when we think about their parasocial relationships with us, we think about them building something, right? Male fantasy is seen as something that can create reality. I really think about the way that people talk about, like, the kids' parasocial relationship with Stay, and how much we idolize what is, frankly, I find sometimes a concerning for them relationship. But we see their fantasy of us and their fantasy of themselves as what drives their hard work, which is true to an extent, right? But we see our fantasy as not part of reality. It's not politics because our fantasy is about escape. Are we doing this to ourselves? That's fascinating. That's a really fascinating direction to think about it. God, that line is everything. I wish I had a highlighter. That line is incredible. Male fantasy is seen as something that can create reality, whereas female fantasy is regarded as pure escape. And I would bet that that's true for most marginalized genders once they are, if they are seen as femme, which a lot of trans men are, not because people suck, right? A lot of trans-masc people are because people suck. God, fantasy. God, that's fascinating. Hence, the romance novel remains the only domain in which women speak of love with any degree of authority. However, when men appropriate the romance genre, their work is far more rewarded than is the writing of women. A book like The Bridges of Madison County is the supreme example. Had a woman penned this sentimental, shallow story of love, which did, though, have its moments, It is unlikely it would ever have become such a major mainstream success, crossing all boundaries of genre. I don't think a girl group would have been given the access, love, and freedom that Stray Kids was by most places. I think if Stray Kids were a group of women doing the same exact thing, they would not be seeing the success they're seeing. Which makes me, of course, think about Xlov. And I'm so glad that their agency is giving them some amount of their support despite some of the issues they have. But Xlov is really, really struggling in being acknowledged, and I wonder, as they continue to lean into their creative freedom that essentially lets them be seen as a gender expansive group, what that struggle ends up looking like for them. I think a lot of international fans are really, really hopeful that Xlov will just be loved. And I don't think it's going to be that simple. It's certainly not currently that simple. They've been completely unacknowledged they had an incredible debut, right? They've had an incredible year. By all rights, they should be being acknowledged as a rookie group, and they have not been acknowledged by any award shows, right? By any, it's, and there are many ways in which Xlov has similarities to Stray Kids in what they're doing, right? They're trying to take full creative freedom. They're trying to break a lot of boundaries. They're breaking a lot of boundaries with music and concept. They are there are many ways in which Xlov is reflective of a marginalized gender version of Stray Kids in, there's just a lot of parallels there. And I think we're going to, I hope it's not as difficult for them as I am worried that it's going to be. Right? Because I think that what we're essentially going to see is that eventually they're going to be perceived as more and more femme, and we're going to start seeing how people respond, not just to a group of people who are marginalized gender, but a group of people who are femme presenting, very often femme presenting marginalized genders. Because I think that if it were, I think it'd also have different consequences if it were a highly mask presenting girl group. That would be difficult for different reasons, right? And they'd still probably be, I don't think they'd be perceived as men the way that they should be, if that was what would happen. But I think that this is also a good point about what it is to, how culture is much more likely to revere men who break boundaries or who don't. Why did my computer just turn off on me? What just happened? Okay, I guess I'm back. My computer just totally turned off on me. It was super weird, and I don't know why. An encoder error occurred while recording. Why? What is going on? Am I here? I think I'm here. Do I somehow like have no more? No, I have free space on my PC. What is happening? Okay, well, I guess I'll just record the VOD. This is so weird. I have no idea what's going on. Maybe this is a sign. I just want to get through a little bit more of this because this has been so fascinating. This is just absolutely... I'm never going to stop thinking about this. Of course, consumers of books about love are primarily female. Yet male sexism alone does not explain the lack of more books by and about love written by women. Apparently, women are both willing and eager to hear what men have to say about love. Female sexist thinking may lead a woman to feel she already knows what another woman will say. Such a reader may feel that she has more to gain by reading what men have to say. Yeah, I've seen that. Earlier in my life, I read books about love and never thought about the gender of the writer. Eager to understand what we mean when we speak of love, I did not really consider the extent to which gender shaped a writer's perspective. It was only when I began to think seriously about the subject of love and to write about it that I pondered whether women do this differently from men. Reviewing the literature on love, I noticed how few writers, male or female, talk about the impact of patriarchy, the way in which male domination of women and children stands in the way of love. Yeah. John Bradshaw's Creating Love, The Next Great Stage of Growth is one of my favorite books on the topic. He valiantly attempts to establish the link between male domination, the institutionalization of patriarchy, and the lack of love of families. Famous for work that calls attention to the inner child, quote unquote, Bradshaw believes that ending patriarchy is one step in the direction of love. However, his work on love has never received ongoing attention and celebration. It did not get the notice given work by men who write about love while affirming sexist defined gender roles. Profound changes in the way we think and act must take place if we are to create a loving culture. Men writing about love always testify that they have received love. They speak from this position. It gives what they say authority. Women, more often than not, speak from a position of lack, of not having received the love we long for. A woman who talks of love is still suspect. Perhaps this is because all that enlightened women may have to say about love will stand as a direct threat and challenge to the visions men have offered us. I enjoy what male writers have to say about love. I cherish my Rumi and my Rilke, male poets who stir hearts with their words. Rilke? I don't know. Men often write about love through fantasy, through what they imagine is possible rather than what they concretely know. We know now that Rilke did not write as he lived, that so many words of love offered us by great men fail us when we come face to face with reality. And even though John Gray's work troubles me and makes me mad, I confess to reading and rereading Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. But, like many women and men, I want to know about the meaning of love beyond the realm of fantasy, beyond what we imagine can happen. I want to know love's truths as we live them. I think that's so interesting. Especially when we think about like the things that Stray Kids have talked about lot about certain things that inspire them. And a lot of it is media. A lot of it is media. And of course that's going to happen to an extent because what is this stupid ban evader? That's going to be true to an extent because, you know, idols are highly restricted in the behavior they're allowed to have. In addition, they write a lot, right? They do a lot of writing, and we all get inspired by things. But a lot of their stuff is inspired by fiction that they consume. And now that I think about it, I do find that there is this fantastical element to a lot of the ways that men in my life have talked about love. And who male creatives, the way that they imagine love or perceive it in others versus a lot of femme creators I know who write about experiences. Certainly, like, both exist. But I do think about like that that is a common thing I see as I think about it, is that sort of women writing about love from the perspective of the things that they have lacked or the things that they have experienced, and men writing about love from the way fantasies are presented. In fandom, of course, a lot of the ways women write about love is fantastical. Oh, but even then, that's so much of what the parasocial relationship is, isn't it? Is trying to experience a real love. Is trying to validate love as something that is occurring with a real person in reality, rather than validating love as a fantastical love. Now, of course, there are male fans of like girl groups who do the same thing. Again, it's not like universal. I have to think about it, though. I really have to think about it. But yeah, like a lot of the kids talk about, like, so much of their work is inspired by media. And some of that I've put down to, you know, life experience. They're still pretty young and they write a lot. Some of that I've put down to, like, potentially a level of, like, autism, even, potentially. But is some of that also certain programming about men looking at love externally? Like, is there an element of that there? That's really a fascinating question. I've got a lot of fascinating questions from this so far. And, like, I can tell that there's just more and more and more all the time. And my head is starting to hurt. That's been a lot of thinking for the last 2 hours. I've been doing a lot of thinking for these 8 pages. That's what praxis looks like, is spending 2 hours on 8 pages. And, doing a lot of thinking. And then contemplating how that thinking might change your behavior, might change your thought paths, might change the way you want to hold values and conceptualize the world, right? That's like our gentle day-to-day praxis, So if you're ever feeling really let down with fandom, or really let down with, what you're experiencing in community, like, remember to lead that with love. That this is about love and hope and transformation. And that while it can feel really desperate and hopeless to have these types of weeks on the internet, you are not helpless. You do have access and ways and means. Listen, even if you don't have access to a library, if you have access to the internet at all, which, not everybody does, but like the anarchist archives are freely open source available on the internet, right? Yes, it can be hard to access like all the books and all the readings that you want, but like there are opportunities out there to learn from places that hold similar values as you do. I fucking love listening to Beyond the Bastards, right? It's silly, it's fun, and it helps me think about who I am in the world and where I am and the context of the world that I'm in. So we're not helpless. We're not hopeless. We do have things we can do. A lot of those things involve introspection and thinking and contextual analysis and talking to other community members and, engaging in that way. And when you do more of that, you think of more ways that you can practice that day-to-day praxis. So those are my thoughts. I don't know. I will post. I guess I'll just download the VOD since my recording fucked up multiple times for some reason. And I'll post this places. And I don't know if it's something that 5 or 10 people find really valuable and helpful. I'll do more of it. Otherwise, I won't. Yeah. But I'm going to go to the, very few of you here. Goodbye. I appreciate you. Adios.